And again, in a drama, that often can be accomplished visually. So that might mean, if you're reading the drama, that you would be looking at the stage directions at the beginning that would describe the scene and give a sense of what's going on. And if you're watching the play, then you're going to take in the visual information in terms of the set, the costumes of the characters, and then whatever the opening dialogue is will give you a sense of what's going on.
This feels nice. Come up to the fire, ladies.
I'm not cold.
Now, before we move things about, Mr. Hale, why don't you explain to Mr. Henderson exactly what you saw when he came here yesterday morning?
Oh, by the way, has anything been moved? Or are things exactly as you left them?
It's just the same. When it dropped below zero last night, I sent Frank out this morning to make the fire for us. No use getting pneumonia with a big case on, but I told him not to touch anything except the stove. And you know Frank.
Somebody should have been left here yesterday.
So in this case, we get the sense that it's winter, that we're set in the early 20th century, and that something has gone on that requires a sheriff. One of the first conversations is talking about a concern for maintaining the evidence, the sheriff noting that someone should have been left here. So we get the sense that this place that they're entering is a crime scene. The inciting incident in this play is when Mr. Hale begins to give his evidence. He's actually telling the story of the triggering event that caused all of the investigation, which was his interacting with Mrs. Wright. And so when he begins giving that witness statement in terms of the play itself, that's the inciting incident. It also functions as backstory, right? This is an opportunity for us as the audience to understand why everyone is here and what the crime was.
Well, Mr. Hale, tell us what happened when you came here yesterday morning.
Well, Harry and I started to town with a load of potatoes. We came on the road from my place, and as I got here, I said I was going to go see if I couldn't get John Wright to go with me on a party telephone. I spoke to Wright about it once before, and he put me off, saying folks talk too much, and all he asked was some peace and quiet. There's nobody to talk to himself. But I thought if I went up to the house and talked about it before his wife, I said to Harry, I didn't know it was his wife wanted to make a difference.
Let's talk about that later, Mr. Hale. I do want to talk about that, but till now, just what happened when you got to the house.
I didn't hear or see anything. I knocked on the door and it was still quiet inside. It must be up. It was past 8 o'clock. So I knocked again. I thought I heard someone say, "Come in." I wasn't sure, not sure yet, but I opened the door. This door, there on that rocker, that was right.
And what was she doing?
Well, she was rocking back and forth. She had her apron in her hand. She was sort of pleating it.
And how did she look?
Well, she looked queer.
How do you mean queer?
Well, so she didn't know what she was going to do next. Sort of done up.
And how did she seem to feel about it? Well, Henry, at least we found out she wasn't going to quilt it. She was going to... What do you call it, ladies?
We call it knotted, Mr. Henderson.
So if we think about what we talked about in the definition of climax, that it's a point of no return. It's a point where you can't go back to the way things were at the status quo, the opening, the exposition. Then we need to think about, okay, so what was the exposition? The exposition was, they're coming in to investigate this murder, and Minnie Wright is the only suspect, and she's the one being held at the moment. So when they find the bird and understand, what the motive was, there's, that's going to change things, right? That will change things in the sense that if they turn over that evidence, she's probably going to get convicted, and that'll be that. And by concealing that evidence, they make it more likely for her to not be convicted of that crime and return home. So either way, this is the key element that's going to cause some sort of change. Something's going to happen. That investigation is going to be concluded one way or the other. So simply finding the bird that's definitely an important turning point. But it really does seem like that point of no return, a little more persuasively, is the moment when they decide to conceal that evidence from the men. Because in a certain sense, it changes what the trajectory of that narrative was going to be. Now, it's a debatable point, and you could make your argument as long as you support it from the text. But that's one way of thinking it through. Then there is a brief falling action to the play where the men come back in and sort of make a little joke at the women's expense, and that really winds down to the resolution. And obviously there's some irony to that resolution because, the women and the audience knows that there's this whole other thing that has gone on, and the men are still just sort of joking around and acting like the women don't know anything. So that's the resolution of the play. As I noted, in a drama, especially when you see it performed, you do get a lot of meaning from the visuals that you see, as well as the dialogue being said. So when you're reading a play, you definitely do want to pay attention to those stage directions as well, because that's where you get the visual clues as a reader in those descriptions that are provided.